Thank you all for coming back. We're going to now go to our annual Trish Vradenburg Memorial Lecture, which is basically a keynote of some prominent individual in the field. And we're honored today to have Niranjan Bose of Gates Ventures to do this lecture. My late wife, Trish, was an extraordinarily optimistic woman. She often said, a cure for Alzheimer's. This is a dream, a fantasy. Well, so did Galileo think of dreams and fantasies. So did Salk dream of dreams and fantasies. So today's dream and fantasy is tomorrow's reality. So she drove this sense of how do you confront what seems to be an impossible proposition and an impossible goal, and charge forward with not just optimism and commitment, but with humor and with taking people along with you. So this idea of an annual lecture was that of Andrea Pfeiffer of AC Immune, who gave us this idea for the Be Trish lecture that basically honors those who are helping us stay hopeful and optimistic and motivated to achieve impossible dreams. So I'm proud this year that Niranjan Bose, a managing director of Gates Ventures and a member of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative Leadership Group, is going to speak to us about how we confront the bold unknown and to take it forward with optimism, commitment, and a feeling of fellowship and common vision. So, Niranjan, thank you so very much for being with us today.
George, thank you very much. I should talk to your team about the prominence list. I'm not sure how I made the cut there, but let me have an offline conversation with them. Thank you for this honor. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you joining us in this virtual gathering out of Lausanne. As you can tell, it's a crisp day, 40 degrees with this light breeze. I'm sure Lausanne is where we'd all rather be in person, were it not for the great challenges of 2020. This has been a complicated year, to say the least, and these times have been extremely difficult for everyone. They've been particularly hard for the elderly and families with loved ones suffering from Alzheimer's or related dementias. As George said, we have to embrace the bold unknown. I do want to thank the Lausanne workshop, OECD, the CEO Initiative, Alzheimer's Disease International, and the World Economic Forum for having me here. I'm immensely grateful to be joining you on the second day of such an important gathering, embracing the bold unknown. Scaling, linking, and creating action to drive global innovation to solve challenges presented by Alzheimer's disease is an endeavor that is both ambitious and fundamental. Ambitious because, as we've seen since yesterday, the challenges abound, from diagnostics to therapeutics to integrating both low middle income countries, as well as considering the regulation or global clinical trial support. There's no shortage of complex issues that we're here to work on together. But it's also fundamental because there's still no treatment or cure for Alzheimer's disease. And because it will continue to affect so many millions of people around the world, it is fundamental. The statistics can at times be overwhelming. Every 3 seconds in the world, somebody's going to develop dementia. That means by the time I finish here today, approximately 300 people will have developed dementia. There are about 50 plus million people worldwide living with dementia, and that number will almost double every 20 years if we don't find that treatment or cure. And if you take a country like the United States, Alzheimer's is the only condition or cause of death in the top 10 for which there's no treatment or cure. And that's why our work is so ambitious and so fundamental. And I'm certain Trish Vradenburg knew those two things to be very true. Although I wasn't lucky enough to have had a chance to meet Trish, I've learned a lot about her dreams and passion from my interactions with George, her partner in life and in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. As many of you know, Trish's mother died from the complications of Alzheimer's disease, And from that moment on, Trish dedicated much of her life to fighting this disease, raising millions of dollars for research, and eventually co-founding Us Against Alzheimer's. I recently read that because Trish was genetically predisposed to Alzheimer's, she was afraid that those moments of normal forgetfulness we all have were signaling the onset of disease. But Trish refused to get tested until there was a cure. I remember reading, she said she'd rather get hit by a truck after tasting the last bite of chocolate than linger in the demented limbo her mother experienced. And she knew firsthand about the suffering that Alzheimer's disease can bring to individuals, their families, and loved ones, but she never lost hope. It is with that same optimism that Bill Gates and his team embarked on a journey in November 2017 to help accelerate the R&D efforts in Alzheimer's disease. Mr. Gates articulated a 5-part framework that guides our efforts in this field, and our first investment was in the Dementia Discovery Fund to help diversify the pipeline with more shots on goal, and even more importantly, more diverse shots on goal. But no shots on goal can ever be possible without our partners. Our work in Alzheimer's disease embraces a mindset of partnership and collaborations, and our efforts would be fruitless without any of them. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank all the folks who have helped us in our current journey. Many of you are with us today. Thank you. Today, I'd like to touch upon 2 of those pillars from our 5-part framework: early diagnosis and data access. In 2018, in partnership with the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, the Dolby family, the Schwab Foundation, Bezos Expeditions, and the Association for Frontotemporal Dementia, we launched the Diagnostics Accelerator with a sole focus on bringing a simple, non-invasive, and scalable test for easier diagnosis and detection of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. This initiative focuses on 2 approaches: a peripheral fluid biomarker approach, including ocular methods, and one on digital markers. We have a growing portfolio of projects and investments, and we're encouraged by the promising results that we heard about the 40-42 ratio, the phospho-tau measurements, and other novel biomarkers emerging. I'm also optimistic that one day we'll have a digital phenotype or digital marker that can complement a blood-based assay. And this expanded on our work in diagnostics with a couple of additional partnerships with the American Heart Association, Boston University, and Alzheimer's Research UK. We expect to double down on the diagnostics initiative with more investments and partnerships, including one with the IMI coming up in 2021 and a consortium of industry partners. Of course, we realize that access to high-quality samples are critical for biomarker and diagnostics validation. And to complement our investment in diagnostics, we have established over 6 partnerships, including with pharma biotech companies for sample access for validation of the diagnostics. The second initiative I'd like to touch on today is data sharing and data access. Right now, all around the world, researchers are collecting data about Alzheimer's disease-related dementias. Some of them interventional studies, some of them observational studies, but nevertheless, the amount of data and the richness of those data sets is phenomenal. In each case, they're learning new things about the disease. To facilitate better and broader access, sharing, and generation of insights from those valuable data sets, we brought together a coalition of partners to initiate a pilot a couple of years ago to understand the barriers to data access, the challenges with interoperability, and to identify solutions to overcome those challenges. Thanks largely to that coalition of partners and 3 data platforms who participated in the pilot, Dementia Platforms UK, GAIN, and the Critical Path Institute, we launched the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative last month. The pilot provided a roadmap for scaling this initiative via expansion to additional platforms. Earlier today, we heard about the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative and their work on cohorts and the attempt to generate an atlas. We want to expand to such initiatives, add additional platforms, additional data sets, and more importantly, diversify and expand the user community. There's a lot we still don't know about Alzheimer's, but I'm hopeful that will change very soon. Our understanding will vastly increase, and one small part that can play in that expansion of the understanding should be a data initiative, and we're glad to be partnering with a coalition to launch the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative with the sole purpose of generating knowledge and insights from data sharing, data access, and breaking down the silos. As we transition to the next slide, you'll note that our learning journey in this field continues. One thing we believe in is continuous learning, and how can we improve our programmatic investments? How can we expand our investments in overcoming these R&D bottlenecks? And the one area we're actively trying to better understand is, are there ways we can overcome the barriers for enrollment in clinical trials? Can we be more efficient with the screening process? Would registries facilitate? Are there other ways we can actually make trials more efficient? As Jeff Cummings shared yesterday, there's a growing R&D pipeline of candidates, which is fantastic. And our hope is that the clinical trial enrollment, duration, and processes become a lot easier for patients, researchers, families in the near future. I'd like to close by quoting Trish, who once wrote that a cure for Alzheimer's was a fantasy, a wish, an impossible dream. But those were the same words that were said to Galileo, Edison, Curie, and Salk, as George alluded to in the opening. Yesterday's dream, she continued, is today's reality. It is with that in mind that I express that it's an honor to be here to deliver this lecture in honor of Trish's legacy and a lecture that's in her name, and my sincere gratitude to all the organizers for giving me the opportunity. I do hope we can make yesterday's dream today's reality when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, and I hope that day comes in the near future where we can see her dream materialize. Thank you, George. Thank you to the Lausanne workshop. Thanks for this honor and opportunity.
Thank you, Bose. And for those of you who don't have the great gift and opportunity to know Bose, he likes to refer to, or at least accepts being referred to by his last name, because Niranjan is a little tougher for many people, although increasingly around the world, we're learning how to pronounce each other's names. Mine's Dutch and his is, where are you from, Niranjan? What's your background?
I'm from the southern part of India. Hometown is Chennai. The last name is a bit misleading.
How did you get from southern India to your position in Seattle?
So my passion and interest growing up in a part of India, seeing abject poverty and the rampage of infectious diseases, was to work on infectious diseases. And I came to the U.S. to do my doctorate in cholera pathogenesis. Cholera, as you are aware, is a rampant disease, especially in South Asia, Bay of Bengal, India, Bangladesh, and neighboring countries. So I started my work on cholera, and after finishing my graduate degree, I was with a consulting firm for a few years before joining the Gates Foundation to work on their infectious disease program. And it's that journey that brought me to Seattle about 15 years ago.
It is interesting, given our current experience with COVID, the enormous fiscal, scientific, and collaborative response to that infectious disease. And yet we know that Alzheimer's has greater prevalence and lethality than COVID. So what is striking is that we cannot get the world's excitement around Alzheimer's, the kind of excitement, the kind of resource commitment, the kind of collaborative commitment and mechanisms that we've been able to achieve with respect to infectious diseases. We haven't been able to do it with chronic diseases. And I'm curious as to, one of the one of the people that can do that is Bill Gates. He has done such an extraordinary, has had such an extraordinary impact on infectious diseases, and his engagement in Alzheimer's is very encouraging for those of us in the field. That in fact we can bring that kind of energy and insight and resource commitment to this a chronic disease. But I'm curious as to what ideas you might have as to how we elevate this chronic, prevalent, lethal disease that is chronic in character to the same level as infectious.
Yeah, thanks, George. Two things come to my mind when we compare to infectious diseases. One is that of memory. It's short term. You see it, and just like we're seeing it with COVID, we saw it with Ebola. There's almost always an immediate response. Comparing it to Alzheimer's, as people often say, it's a long goodbye. It's a chronic illness. It takes time, and families suffer through it for a very long period. So that distinction is something we need to keep in mind. How do we change that mindset? How do we bring it to the same prominence as something that's near and immediate, like an infectious disease? I think the second thing, and this is advocates in infectious diseases, HIV, have been a powerful group. When talking about Alzheimer's and related dementias, it is hard for those patient advocates and to be the champions for themselves. So that's, again, where I think families and caregivers and organizations like yours, Us Against Alzheimer's, the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Disease International Coalition, play a huge role. And thanks in large part to all your efforts, it's fantastic to see the increased investments coming from the federal funding agencies in the US and the UK to solving this debilitating illness and challenge. So I would say everyone's on the right track with respect to advocacy as well as directed investments. What can we learn from infectious diseases? How do we use COVID as an opportunity? If COVID clinical trials are enrolling pretty rapidly in a fast manner with digital technologies enabling them, could we take a page off that book? Same with data sharing and the International COVID Data Alliance. How did they break down barriers to data access, privacy, and lack of consent, et cetera? How could we learn from those? I would say those are the types of learnings I would look from the infectious disease world.
You know, Rhoda O made the point in an earlier panel about how digital technology over the next 5 to 10 years can transform the way we make ongoing passive clinical assessments so that we can make a better detection earlier in the course of disease and to respond more rapidly, and also follow potentially Chairman Naito of ISA made the point about an ecosystem for caring for those with dementia, where you basically track people, give them reminders, and provide a variety of supports for those families living with the disease. Do you see digital technology having an impact in the way we conduct research and how we transform the care systems for people with dementia? And if so, how?
Absolutely, I do. And I know Rhoda embraces the bold unknown, and we're glad to be partnering with Rhoda on some of the digital phenotyping, digital biomarker work. And recently I learned about the NONO project that ASI and Cog State have partnered on with starting in Japan. A couple of things come to mind for me when we talk about how can we embrace and leverage that, the digital frontier. With the caveat that we still have a lot more work to do in trying to come up with that digital signature or digital phenotype. But if we don't embrace it, if we don't work on it, we'll never solve it. We'll never know whether it's a solvable problem. So we absolutely should do that. The two things that come to me on how it could enable a field like Alzheimer's. One is, are there activities of daily living that, with the patient's consent, with the family's or the caregiver's consent, would allow us to form this digital signature, whether it's keystrokes, voice, movement. Is it a composite measure? Could that early digital signature allow us to then connect the dot to enrollment in clinical trials, or even going to a memory clinic for a screen so you can confirm or detect and diagnose earlier in the cycle of the disease? I think the second piece I would say is during the conduct of clinical trials. Are there digital markers, whether it's the digital clock drawing test that's been embraced, or could progression of the disease be tracked with, let's say, digital voice? I'm not saying we're there today, but I'm optimistic we'll get there one day.
Last question. We have a love-hate relationship with digital technology these days. On the one hand, it enables our communication, enables so many things in our daily life, and we love it. But when we begin to think about how we're being tracked and how that digital information is being sold and used by others to try and manipulate us, we get very, very nervous. So how do we build that kind of trust into the use of digital technology, into some of the most intimate elements of our life, namely our mind, our memory, our daily behavior? How do we create that world of trust as we begin to integrate digital technology into these solutions?
Yeah, fantastic question. And even in this COVID pandemic, as you've seen, while there are certain countries that have embraced digital technologies for contact tracing, there are parts of the world where, for genuine privacy, consent related issues, that adoption isn't high. I think trust is not something, as you very well know, trust is not something that we're going to be able to flip a switch and say, start trusting us. So I think we need to start demonstrating via pilots, via research studies, that there are aspects of the data that will not lead to re-identification of the individuals. Voice is one where it's going to be difficult to mask and not re-identify. But I'm confident that over time, there will be algorithms to mask an individual's voice, or ways to introduce noise so you can't re-identify the individual. So trust is something that we absolutely have to work on. And I think it's something that needs to be earned over the course of time with some systematic, thoughtful pilots.
Well, thank you again, Bose, for doing what you do, serving as sort of the point for Bill Gates in this field, and for investing and identifying the critical factors that we need to address in order to move forward. And thank you personally for accepting the opportunity today to speak and so lovingly of Trish, which of course is so close to me. And she had 3 generations of her family had been affected by this. And of course, continue this fight for our kids and grandkids. I'm in denial. Guys never get this, right? So thank you for also being a member of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative Leadership Group. You and our partnership with you in data in that space is something we very much look forward to.